Hello everybody. In this quick little segment, I wanted to explain assessment. I know that we sometimes run out of time in class, and it's always nice to hear it again. So, assessment, as we discussed in class, is the process of gathering and judging evidence in order to decide whether a person has achieved a standard or objective. So, when you're thinking about your lesson plans and you write your measurable objectives and you have your learning standards, how are we going to prove to either parents or principals, etc., that our students are actually meeting our objectives and our learning standards? Well, we assess them. So there are different types of assessments. First of all, there's an informal assessment, and on the screen you can see the definition of informal assessment. They're not really data driven, but they're really content and performance driven. So when you look at specific examples of informal assessments, you can see that they could be portfolios or running records or notes that you take about your students during class. Think about those grades that we received on our report cards when we were young about our behavior in class. This might be a similarity or an idea regarding informal assessment. So a teacher had a clipboard or some type of tracking device, and they were able to make sure that you were on task and that you were achieving certain objectives, maybe not related to a standardized test or quiz. And then they would evaluate you based on your performance and your progress during the quarter or the semester. Now, formal assessments have data which support the conclusions made from the test or the assignment. And a formal assessment is pretty much where you get your grades. So when you think about your grade point average and your grades, a lot of times we think of formal assessments occurring throughout the class. There could be summative or they could be at the end of the semester. But anyway, so the formal assessment, basically, where you're looking at the scores, they can be standardized, which means everyone's taking the same test, for example, and you'd be able to use the results to compare and contrast, and then also kind of chart or map how much the students have learned during a unit or even a lesson plan or a lesson or possibly even a grading period or a semester. Now, traditional assessments are those forced choice measures of multiple choice tests, fill in the blank, true, false. So something you're very familiar with as a student, and even I'm very familiar. So taking the test, and I'm going to show you an example down below here. This is what we're familiar with. So this is the Great Depression pre-post test. It's very traditional. It's very formal in nature. You have some matching, you have some fill in the blank, or you have possibly short answer. Here we go. True or false. And multiple choice. This is very standard. We're very familiar with this format of testing. And there's nothing wrong with this format of testing. I mean, if you use this format from time to time or weekly or bi-weekly or whatever, you can get a lot of data from this as well. But you should also mix it up with some other assessment types, which we'll talk about in the next few minutes. Well, how do you grade this test? Well, use an answer key. So, for example, in this Great Depression test, if you wanted to use an answer key to grade your student submissions, this is what it would look like. So you'd have the number corresponding to the question as well as the letter and or answer. So the word, the fill in the blank, here you go, true, false, the correct word, etc. So as you can see, in a standard traditional test, we would use an answer key to grade to see if a student scored a passing score or if they failed the assignment. All right, moving right along. Another note about traditional assessment too. Traditional assessments can be in your classroom. They can be like a statewide test. For example, a lot of our students take ISAT tests in the spring as well as Prairie State exams, and those are traditional assessments, and they are obviously locally or statewide, and then also internationally. So when you guys take any kind of certification exams or when you took the ACT, that's an international traditional assessment because obviously if you're a student wanting to be in the college system, you would take the exam that everyone takes to get into the certain colleges. Now, authentic assessment is that balance between the traditional, which is very teacher created, multiple choice in nature, fill in the blank, Authentic is the student projects. And so you should find a balance between the two when you plan for your lesson plans as well as for multiple lesson plans following a theme. A unit of instruction is what it's called. So an authentic assessment usually includes a task for students to perform and a rubric by which their performance on the task will be evaluated. Now there are many different names for authentic assessment. Sometimes people call it performance assessment or performance-based assessment because you're asking students to actually do something or perform meaningful tasks. This is a very common term. And then also sometimes you'll hear alternative assessment because it's the alternative to the traditional assessment. And then you also have direct assessment because it provides direct evidence of meaningful application of the knowledge and skills. So multiple choice, in a multiple choice test, we infer indirectly that the student could apply that knowledge in real world contexts or real life situations. But in a direct assessment, you're having them actually make something, create something, show you something. So there's a direct connection between the objective or the learning standard and actually what the student is completing or creating. So as you can see, there are benefits to both traditional and authentic assessment, and as an educator, you should try your best to find that balance and allow students to kind of explore both options. So to kind of review here, a traditional test, selecting a response, it's contrived, it's a lot of recall and recognition, pretty low on the Bloom's taxonomy scale. Remember the triangle with the different levels? It's very teacher structured, so we make those ahead of time. We pretty much give the students the test, they answer the questions, they turn them back in, and we grade them. And there's indirect evidence. Authentic, on the other hand, students are performing a task, so they're doing something. It really tries to replicate real life experiences or a situation. There's a lot of construction and application. So it's moving up to the point of the top of Bloom's taxonomy. It's student structured, and there is obviously direct evidence that the student is meeting the objective or the learning standard. And so rubrics, for example, help us grade those authentic assessments because we want to be fair. And with an answer key, it's easy. You just look, number 1 is A, number 2 is B, and so on, and everyone is graded the same way. But when you go into authentic assessments, you really have to create a strategy in which how you will grade your students. And so let's take a look at some examples of some authentic assessments, and so you can kind of get a better picture. Now, as I said before, you have to use a rubric to grade an authentic assessment to make sure that it's fair equally from one student to the next. And so some of the projects that you would create a rubric for, some of those assessments would be like oral projects, like reading aloud speeches, for example, multimedia projects, mathematics projects, things that you build, work skills. And so I'm looking at a website called Rubistar, and this is a really handy, helpful website that you can use. It's totally free, and do not be afraid of all these logins and go to saved rubrics on the screen. You don't actually need to log in at all in order to create a really quick rubric. So let's say, for example, you're teaching a language arts Common Core standard and you want to see what kind of writing rubrics are out there. What's really neat about Rubistar is it kind of shows you the different types of projects that you might use one day in your class. Like, for example, making a book jacket report or writing a letter or a persuasive essay or a research report. So let's say, for example, we want our students to write a research report. So if I click on that, it will actually bring me to a screen where it asks me to fill in the blanks. So I just create, type my first name, my last name, and then if I have a specific topic for the research, I include that here. Go ahead and put in the zip code where you live. They won't try to contact you, believe me. And then also, this is a temporary rubric. If you wanted to keep the rubric, you'd have to log in. So just understand that. And then when you scroll down, you get to select the categories. And then, as we've discussed in class, rubrics obviously are divided by categories, things that we think are important about the project. So when you're writing something, obviously the amount of information, the quality, the sources, the mechanics, these are all the categories that we find important. So when you select one of the categories, let's start with the amount of information. Notice how Rubistar fills in the blanks for you. Now you can totally adjust this. So if you don't want 2 sentences, you can say 5 sentences. So you just click inside the box, replace the 2 with the 5, and then make sure you replace the other things in the other boxes. Go on to the next category again. Go ahead and pick whatever category you want and adjust any of the text to make it fit your needs. If you don't like the names of the categories that they have on here, you notice this box down below. You can actually type in your own category right here. Now, the problem with that is you're going to have to fill in all these blanks, but that's not such a bad thing. So it's more customized to meet your needs. Now, notice how many of these categories you can have on one rubric. So this is just one project. And when you're ready to make it look nice and make a copy of it or print it, you click submit. Now, on the next screen, it'll actually show you your finished project. And of course, I didn't put my zip code, so that's okay. We won't do that. So anyway, you can just see how you can customize it to meet your needs. So notice, this is just one example. There are tons of examples that you can use in order to decide what kind of project that you want students to create. So when I go back home, I'll kind of look at the different categories again. So let's say you have a math project. So if you notice for math, you have graphing and you have math problem solving. So let's say, for example, you want to give your math students a problem solving activity and you're like, how do I grade that? Like, what am I looking for? So when you fill in the blanks, of course, at the top, they give you the categories. So concepts, reasoning, mathematical errors, etc. So when you click on it, it'll fill in the criterion for you. So then you can decide, oh, I want that to be 80 to 100%, not 90. Of course, you can totally customize it to meet your needs. So as you can see, there are a lot of different projects that we can ask students to complete in order to meet our objectives and our learning standards. So again, there's reading, music, art, math, work skills, research, science, multimedia, products, and oral projects. So there's tons of things out there that you can ask. And notice too, like for the products area, you could have a student make a brochure for any subject area. So a brochure obviously shares information. So maybe you have a historical figure that you want them to create a brochure about, maybe a field trip or a destination. Maybe you're going to have students create a brochure on some type of learning opportunity in class, in science class, like a brochure of a mammal. It doesn't matter. It's really up to you. So you take these products and you customize it to meet the needs of your specific grade level or subject area. Now let me show you an example. So earlier we looked at the Great Depression test and answer key. Now of course this works. Many of us have experienced a very traditional test in a U.S. history class, and of course it's pretty easy to create for the most part. There is an art to creating a good test, but for the most part it's pretty much just typing and proofreading, etc., printing, making sure you have enough copies, and then you grade the assignment and then you can see, oh, this many people got this many right, maybe I need a review. But again, I don't know how many people have had awesome experiences taking a test, or they walk away going, gosh, that was a great test, I'm so glad we took that test. Most of us are pretty much stressed out, or we feel like, oh, I've got to cram for this exam, and then as soon as we walk out of that testing site, we may or may not remember anything that we just did, because that's the type of experience that we've just gone through. But what about authentic assessment? Because we tend to remember the projects and everything that we've created in classes. So let me show you an example of an authentic assessment. Okay, so we're in the Great Depression, and of course there's a lot of things that happened. People struggled, they lost their jobs, but then also there was a lot of culture happening at this time. You have, kind of like the continuation of the Jazz Age, etc., and people were still out trying to make the most of the situation. And so maybe you could have students learn how to dance a specific dance move from the time period. So of course we can use quizzes and tests and all that, but what if we assessed students on working in teams and also maybe on following directions, as well as their oral presentation skills? So this is an example of an authentic assessment where students are asked to research dance moves from the time period, and then not only do they have to know about the dance move, but they also have to learn it and then teach the class, their classmates, how to dance using the steps. Now, of course, you'd want to create a rubric, but I'm not a dance teacher. I don't know if you'll be a dance teacher, but I'm not grading on dance per se and their fundamentals of dance. I'm actually looking at if they're willing to participate, if they want to work in their group, if they are teaching us an accurate dance from the time period. I'm looking for those basic things. And so if a student says, you know what, I'm not going to dance, Mrs. Phelan, then of course they're going to get a 0 on this. If they're kind of not really into it, they're not offering ideas, they're just sitting around during their group meetings, then they might get a point for being there, but that's about it. If they actively participate, things like that, yeah, they should get some points for that. But if they get up in front of the audience and they perform and they try their best and their dance is pretty close to being right, then they should get the full score. So as you notice, even for activities in class, a rubric can be very complicated, it can have a lot of categories, but it also can be very simple for students and for teachers as well. So again, assessment can mean a lot of different things. It can mean, for example, very informal assessments where we look at student behavior in the classroom as well as a collection of items over time, kind of like completion grades, for example, that maybe you've received. It can be very formal, which we have data that we receive, like actual scores from assignments. It can be traditional in nature, which is another little offshoot, which means it's multiple choice, it's fill in the blank, it's matching, things that we're very familiar with. It can also be authentic, which students actually create things. It's direct assessment, which means they're showing you that they know the meaning, they understand, they can analyze the actual learning standard and objective that you've written for your lesson plan. Again, traditional assessments are graded with answer keys. So when we looked at the Great Depression exam and we used an answer key to grade it to see if students passed or failed. And then also authentic assessments, we use rubrics because we want to make sure that we grade fairly no matter when the student presents or what type of product that they produce. And again, it's always a good idea to show the students the rubric ahead of time because you want to give them some guidance on an authentic assessment as much as possible. If you have any questions about assessment, feel free to let me know.